Hi, everybody. How's it going? Good, thank you. Thank you so much. I first and foremost want to say thank you for choosing to be here right now. I know there are a number of incredible sessions today, and I'm so grateful that you chose to spend 20 minutes with me. I'm actually here all on my own, so if you later on see me walking around, wandering aimlessly looking for friends, feel free to say hi. I love making new friends. I already have made some new friends, which has been really great. So my name is Paul Emrick France. I'm a National Board Certified Teacher. I'm the author of several books, one of which actually comes out next week. The second edition of my book, Reclaiming Personalized Learning, comes out next week, in which I address sustainability a bit. I'm also a consultant, so I'm spending time working with some schools in Kentucky right now. And a lot of what we're talking about right now is how to make personalized learning specifically more sustainable. So what I want to talk about today is I want to zoom out a little bit. We're not just going to talk about personalized learning, but we're going to talk about 6 mindset shifts for sustainable teaching. So we're going to start with this assumption that teaching is unsustainable currently. This is partially a product of the pandemic, but I think we can all agree that even before the pandemic, teaching was unsustainable. I know this from experience as a teacher who was in a traditional classroom for 10 years. I left my first teaching position after 4 years because I didn't feel comfortable and safe being out and open as a queer educator in the classroom. After my 4th year in that school district, it was a suburban public school district, I made my way out to San Francisco, where I worked for an education technology startup company and network of micro schools. And over those 3 years, our charge was to personalize learning using digital technology. Our main tool for doing this was a playlist. Has anyone heard of a playlist before for personalizing learning? Yeah. So the idea behind a playlist is that every child gets an individualized set of activities. And as you might imagine, it's really hard to do. It takes a lot of time. And after 3 years there, after giving it all my effort, I decided that that was unsustainable for me as well. And I decided to go back to Chicago, where I worked for an independent school for 3 years as a 3rd grade teacher, diversity coordinator. I was our academic chair, and I was also the co-director of the assistant teacher program. And while that was a lot of work and probably also unsustainable, I ultimately decided to leave that position because, well, I should say the straw that broke the camel's back was I was tired of feeling like my voice and the voices of my colleagues weren't heard, especially, and this was in 2020, especially as we were making decisions about returning to school in the midst of a pandemic. So I ultimately decided to leave. But if there's one message I want you to take away from our time together today, it's that teaching may be unsustainable, but it doesn't have to be this way. And if we work together and we start talking about it, we can actually make incremental changes that can make our profession more sustainable and hopefully make people want to stay in our profession and actually become teachers. So I actually spent last summer, the summer of 2021, thinking about this idea of sustainable teaching, and I proposed a book to ASCD about it. And as I was starting to write, I realized it didn't make sense for me to only center my voice in this conversation. And so I created the Sustainable Teaching Project, where I surveyed a number of teachers. There's actually a QR code on the screen, so if you would like to contribute your thoughts and ideas to what sustainable teaching should look like moving forward, you are welcome to do that. I will look forward to seeing your responses in a little bit. But I ended up getting over 300 survey responses. I conducted over 40 hours of interviews with teachers, which was so fun. And I connected with teachers all over the country. I have representation from all 50 states, including, and I also have representation from lower, middle, and high school. And for me, the synthesis of the surveys has resulted in 6 keys for sustainability and then 6 mindset shifts to guide your sustainability journey, and we're going to explore these today. The 6 mindset shifts are as follows: humanity over industry, empowerment over control, collectivism over individualism, process over product, flexibility over fixedness, and minimalism over maximalism. So I've created some binaries here, and I just want you to know I'm very mindful of that. This is not an either-or situation. I've chosen the word over so that we lean towards the left-hand side and lean away from the right-hand side. And so that's what, when we talk about each mindset shift, just think about leaning one of those ways. Now, these keys to sustainability, you'll see as I talk about them that the mindset shifts overlap. They're not mutually exclusive. And these sustainability keys, I feel, sort of weave them all together. The 3 sustainability keys on the left-hand side, ritual, simplicity, and partnership, they all have something in common, and it's taking something off teachers' plates. Now, those of us in here, well, we have to all be really mindful when we're talking about taking things off of teachers' plates, because I know no one in here thinks this, but people out there, like in the world, in the outside world, think sometimes that teachers are lazy, right? And that we just don't want to work a lot. But the key with these sustainable practices and these mindset shifts is that we're finding practices that are good for teachers and good for their sustainability, but also lead to deep learning for our kids. And so when we're talking about taking something off of teachers' plates, to me it's critical that we communicate that this is good for teachers and it's best for kids. So that's the 3 left-hand keys. The 3 right-hand keys, vulnerability, healing, and regeneration, really tap into the human condition of teaching and learning. I think because education is overly industrialized, we sometimes forget that there are human beings behind this. And so by using vulnerability, healing, and regeneration as keys for sustainability, we allow ourselves to see the humanity in teaching and learning, which is inherently sustainable. So the first mindset shift is humanity over industry. Industrialization is inherently unsustainable, and we can look to our natural world in order to see that. At the heart of industrialization is the exploitation and extraction of natural resources, which has led to a climate crisis. We can use that as sort of a metaphor for our classrooms, and I would argue that in many classrooms across the country, there is also a climate crisis happening within those classrooms. And the way to overcome that is to deindustrialize our curriculum and to start centering the human beings in our classrooms, using vulnerability and healing as keys to sustainability. So this is actually an image from Jean-Marc Cote. He's a French artist, and he imagined what learning was going to look like around the 20th century, around the turn of the 21st century. And he imagined this really industrialized model for education, which I think we still see in some classrooms. So when we shift from industry to humanity, we experience cultural shifts in our classrooms. They become validating, pluralistic. Angela Valenzuela, who wrote Subtractive Schooling, would say there's an authentic culture of care, which is inherently sustainable because everyone is sharing in the responsibility of caring. So it's not just the teacher's responsibility. And pedagogical shifts might look like identity studies, focus on SEL, PBL, that sort of thing. The second mindset shift towards sustainability is empowerment over control. Control is inherently unsustainable because in order for a teacher to be in control of everything that happens in the classroom, they need to hold all the responsibility. But by partnering with our students, we not only make our jobs a little bit simpler, but we actually empower them to help power the classroom. So it's no longer just a job for the teacher to be doing, which ultimately leads to a more sustainable learning environment. So when we center empowerment over control in our classrooms, the classroom culture once again shifts, becomes more agentive. Students experience competence, so they're able to connect their efforts to their progress, which is another energy source for our classrooms, a renewable energy source, if you want to go down that metaphorical road with me. But we also create classrooms where creativity and innovation come from the kids and from the teachers. So these sustainable shifts, or these mindset shifts for sustainability, these also apply to administrators, coaches, superintendents. Our schools should be places where teachers are empowered and not controlled, so that they can create innovative solutions to problems we face in our classrooms every day. So I put a picture of one of my students' journals up here, actually, because I think journaling is such a tangible, concrete example of how we can empower kids in a really practical way. I do almost everything through journaling with students I work with and with the teachers that I coach. And I really believe in this because what it does is it gets kids to be the narrators of their own stories. So they start with a blank journal, and over the course of the year, they fill it up. Now, of course, as the teacher, I'm providing things to help them fill this journal up, right? But you can see this is almost entirely in the student's handwriting. So at the end of the year, they have this beautiful story of what their journey was like in the classroom. It's really sustainable for me because it's all in one place, and it's really good for them because they created it. The next mindset shift is collectivism over individualism. And this is where I'm going to talk about personalized learning for just a moment. So one of the things I realized when I was working in Silicon Valley was that, when I was working for the education technology startup in Silicon Valley, was that we had a flawed definition of personalized learning. We were conflating personalization and individualization. We were thinking that the more that we individualized curriculum, the more personalized it would be. And I, at first, thought that as well. And I realized that that was wrong because there were actually diminishing returns on individualized learning. So if we over-individualize learning, we engender social isolationism in our classrooms, and every kid's working on something different, so there are no longer those serendipitous collision points where kids can just talk about what they're learning. And so this example of personalized learning, I think, plays into the need for collectivism over individualism, but it's also more sustainable. So I use the regeneration key and the healing key for this mindset shift. And I like those keys in particular because collectivism allows us, we don't all have to be on at the same time. So we have a collectivist approach to teaching and learning. Sometimes some kids can step forward and some kids can step back and recharge their batteries. Likewise, the teacher can sometimes step up and guide and sometimes step back and recharge their batteries. So once again, it's something that's really good for kids because it's empowering. Again, we're going to see the overlap between these mindset shifts. But it's also really good for me as the teacher to be able to stand back and watch and support, from the side. So when we shift from individualism to collectivism in our classrooms, we create a consistency in the classroom culture because everyone's a part of creating it. It's restorative, it's interdependent. We can extend the ecosystem metaphor to this idea of interdependence because in a natural ecosystem, its health and survival is dependent on energy being evenly distributed throughout the ecosystem. And so when we shift from individualism to collectivism, one person's not the energy source anymore. All of a sudden, all learners in the classroom are the primary producers of learning, contributing to the sustainability of the classroom ecosystem. So I included a picture. This is one of my favorite things to do with kids. So if you're still in a classroom, and I just strongly suggest you do it, it's so fun. But it's usually a beginning of year activity for me, and they all create their names out of letters, and then we have to create a classroom crossword puzzle together. And I love it because it gives us really authentic opportunities to talk about team building, and it really leans into that collectivist mindset because we're building our classroom culture through team building. The next mindset shift is process over product. So the idea of emphasizing the product in the classroom really leans into the industrialized mindset. In an industrialized mindset, we really are focused on creating identical products efficiently, but when we focus on the process, we are taking that responsibility off ourselves. And that's ultimately more sustainable because it's simpler for us. It takes a lot of energy to move 20, 25, 30 kids along all to the same final product. It's a lot more sustainable for me to stand back and allow the products to naturally diversify themselves and instead coach students through the process. And so I also put the sustainability key, the ritual sustainability key here too. Because when we find processes that work in our classrooms, like reflection processes, inquiry processes, those sorts of things, they create structure in our classrooms and they create ritual, which is very sustainable for a teacher to keep up, right? If I have a ritual, I can come into my classroom every day and use that ritual to keep learning going. Now, that's not to say that a ritual should ever become stagnant. We shouldn't just be mindlessly plodding through things, but rituals and structures can give us something to work within so that we feel like we know where we are and we know where we're going. So when we shift away from product to process, we allow for healthy divergence in our classrooms. Dare I say, we can decelerate learning a little bit in our classrooms. I know that acceleration is a Learning acceleration is a big topic right now. I personally think it's fueled by fears of learning loss, which are largely unproductive. But when we decelerate learning, we allow time for quiet moments. We allow time for recharging our batteries. We allow our students to recharge their batteries. This is a little bit more of a vulnerable shift to take in the classroom because you're really opening yourself up to uncertainty. But it also allows us to be curious about what our kids are doing and why they're doing what they're doing, because that's how we learn to support them, by watching them and being curious about what they're doing. So I included a picture of habits, learning habits cards that I use. I created these, and if you want them, you're welcome to message me on Twitter and I will send them to you. But I use these to help, I should have said this before, I work primarily with elementary school students. So we do a lot of language scaffolding, especially when we're talking about learning habits. And so I use these to help them name the things that they're doing to learn independently. And I found them to be really, really helpful. Another thing you can do is you can actually collect this language as the year goes on, and you could just create your own set with your kids. That would be actually way more meaningful and relevant to them, having created the habits cards. But I love this for building language around the learning process. The fifth mindset shift is flexibility over fixedness. So once again, when we stay fixed, when we try to control learning to a point where we have identical products at the end, it's a lot of energy for the teacher. And it's going to lead to us depleting our energy sources. But again, fixedness is also bad for students, right? If we're too fixed, we're actually not creating equitable learning spaces where all students can be heard and seen and valued for who they are and the gifts they bring to the classroom. And so this prompts a shift from fixedness towards flexibility. And I chose the partnership sustainability key and the vulnerability sustainability key for this mindset shift because it entails partnering with students and it entails opening yourself up to uncertainty in order to be a flexible and responsive teacher. But when we do shift away from fixedness to flexibility, we are still able to incorporate structures into our classrooms. Flexibility doesn't mean we bend till we break. Flexibility means we bend where it makes sense to bend, and we lean on structures that are humanizing and supportive. And in those cases, right, when we do that, learning can emerge from our kids through serendipitous conversations and through their interests and gifts they bring to the classroom. We can be responsive, as I already mentioned, it's equitable. And I included a picture here that's an example of student influence learning. You might be wondering what that huge pile of cans is. It is, this emerged from, we were studying place value in math, and some of my students were wondering, because we were using the place value blocks, you know, the little one, the long, the flat, and then the big cube. And one of them said, I wonder what a million would look like in base 10 blocks. And I was like, that's a great question. And I just so happened to notice that 4 soda cans was about close to the size of a thousands block. And so we collected cans over the course of 3-4 months, something like that. And we made a 10,000, and then we made 100,000, and then we made a bunch of 100,000s, and we made the millions, and we shared it with the whole school. And it was this huge celebration of student-influenced learning. And it was ultimately very sustainable because it created this excitement in our classroom. The kids contributed to it, and it's one of my fondest memories from being a teacher. The final mindset shift is minimalism over maximalism. And I don't want you to necessarily just think of this as only taking things off the teacher's plate. Remember, sustainable practices must be good for teachers and good for kids at the same time. So this is really about reducing the things that don't serve either teachers or students. So when we shift towards minimalism and away from this more is more attitude, we're very intentional about what we're doing. We create space in our classrooms for rest, for, again, those quiet moments where kids can reflect. We also get rid of all the busy work. I always say that busy work for students is busy work for teachers as well. So my favorite example for minimalism is the idea of project-based learning. We have this habit in education of breaking learning down into all these itty bits and pieces, right? And then we have all these itty bits and pieces to manage and take care of. But by using project-based learning, we create one really rich, really deep project to manage. And so it's minimalist in nature in the sense that we're managing one project, right? But a project like this was They had to build a city, and we identified social studies standards for this, but they were also working on area and perimeter multiplication. Like, it was really, really rich and still really, really valuable and really sustainable for me, and also really fun to look forward to. So what I want to leave you with today, I want you to remember that we don't have to simply accept that teaching is unsustainable. It's hard to not accept that, but we don't have to accept that teaching is unsustainable. We can use these 6 mindset shifts and these 6 keys to sustainability to unlock pathways to sustainability for ourselves. So just remember, it doesn't have to be that way, but we are never going to make teaching sustainable if we don't start talking about it now. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you all.